Right. So you talked about like rule books, how there's like different rule books. Like, is there like a core one that's like, is Dungeons and Dragons kind of like an overview, or is Dungeons and Dragons like that one rule book? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there a bunch underneath that, or is there like Dungeons and Dragons, and then there's like other different role playing games, or like what is all that?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of other role playing games. There are a ton. There's D&D, you have Pathfinder, um there's like some licensed
Tales
Star
of the
Wars
Loop. Does
RPGs.
that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Tales of the Loop.
Yeah. And there's also like there's this RPG system called Age where you use just six-sided dice to play and tell stories. It's a lot more cinematic, but so there are a bunch of different games. But as far as Dungeons and Dragons is concerned, there are three core rule books. You have the player's handbook, and the player's handbook talks about all the rules for creating player characters and the rules for playing the game. They tell you how it sets up the rules for the game. It teaches you how to play. It tells you how combat works. It tells you what all the spells in the game are. It has races and classes and how to build your character, that kind of stuff in it.
So it's kind of like a general thing, but you'll still get as creative underneath those
right,
generals.
yeah. And those are like basically the player's handbook gives you puzzle pieces, and then it's up to you to put them together any way you want. And then you have the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Dungeon Master's Guide is specifically for Dungeon Masters, and it has tips on how to run the game. So it tells you about how to make things go smoother. It has a bunch of like random tables that you can roll on to make to see what happens in certain places if you can't come up with something quick enough. So it just has like tips for dungeon masters and tools for them to use, rules clarifications. So like if something doesn't quite make sense in the player's handbook, or if the player is trying to do something that maybe the player's handbook doesn't cover, then the Dungeon Master's Guide will have kind of an answer for that. And then the third core rule book is called the Monster Manual, and the Monster Manual has a bunch of like stat blocks for different monsters. So basically the dungeon master can choose monsters out of the Monster Manual to have the players fight.
Oh,
so it's
wow.
kind of like this encyclopedia of bad guys.
Right.
So it has like the players fill out their character sheets, put all their stats and abilities there. The Monster Manual is full of like character sheets for all the bad guys in the games, from little things like wolves to big things like ancient red dragons.
Wow.
They have the stats in there. And then there are all these other rule books so Dungeons and Dragons is published by Wizards of the Coast, and Wizards of the Coast publishes supplements for D&D. So these supplements, there's a book called Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and that book has more spells in it and more class options, so you can expand upon the stuff in the player's handbook.
Oh, gotcha. So they started kind of the core of everything, but they're kind of adding to the game.
Yeah. So there's always more
Right.
coming out, and so there's also like different worlds that you can play D&D in, right? So we play in my homebrew world. Homebrew is where you make up your own rules, make up your own monsters, or make up your own magic weapons. That kind of stuff. The cool thing about Dungeons and Dragons is it says in the player's handbook, right, that you can choose if you want to ignore any of the rules you don't like, and you can make up your own rules if you want.
Oh,
as
wow,
long as
cool.
the dungeon master says that it's okay, then the dungeon master,
okay.
they get to kind of decide, right? So a lot of times, like, if we're playing and we come upon a rule that like they're like, I'd like to jump across this 30-foot gap, can I do it? And I am like, I can't remember right now how far you can jump, so let me make up a way for you to do it. Like, I'll say, why don't you roll an athletics check to see how far you can jump? Even if that's not the official rule, I can homebrew it in.
Oh, cool.
I can make up my own rule. So you can do it that way. But there's all these worlds that you play in, right? So we play in my homebrew world.
Right.
But Dungeons and Dragons has like an official world called Faerun, and one of the main continent in Faerun, they have a place called the Sword Coast, which is like one side of the continent, and they have all these cities in it. You may have heard of like Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter. They made games, like old computer games like RTS strategy games based in those places.
Right.
But so they have their official settings, And then they've also released books. So there's this world called Eberron, and Eberron is kind of like steampunk. You have like magic trains and stuff like that. Or there's this,
Interesting.
if you've played any Magic the Gathering, the card game is also owned by Wizards of the Coast. And in Magic the Gathering, like if the story behind the card game, there's all these different worlds that like the main characters of the card game can travel between. So since they're both owned by Wizards of the Coast, Wizards of the Coast released a book that has all the details on one of the worlds from Magic. So if you're a really big Magic the Gathering fan and you're looking to get into D&D, you kind of have that route so you can play in a place that's familiar to you.
Oh, cool.